We have footage of you stealing watches from a store in Detroit. That's not me. That is not me at all. Y'all can't tell that? The computer says it's you.
What you just heard was not a scene from a science fiction film. That exchange took place in a Detroit Police Department interrogation room on January 9, 2020. And the man sitting across from that detective, holding a blurry surveillance photo next to his own face and asking if they truly could not see the difference, had done absolutely nothing wrong. Robert Williams was a black man who drove to work every morning from his home in Farmington Hills, Michigan, where he lived with his wife Melissa and their 2 young daughters. He was not a thief. He had never been to the Shinola watch store in Detroit. He had an alibi documented by a Facebook live stream from the day of the crime. He was, by every measurable fact, an innocent man. But a computer algorithm had decided otherwise. And the Detroit Police Department had trusted the algorithm over the evidence, over the alibi, over common sense, and over the face of the man sitting right in front of them telling them the truth. Robert Williams was arrested in his own driveway on a cold January night, in front of his wife and his daughters, in front of his neighbors, based on a technology that the Detroit Police Department's own subsequent investigation would confirm had made a mistake. He was the first person in the United States to be publicly identified as a victim of a wrongful arrest caused by facial recognition technology. He would not be the last. Every single person wrongfully arrested by Detroit police using this technology was black. This is the full story, and every single detail of it is real. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from. And ask yourself this: if a computer can be used to put an innocent black man in jail for 30 hours, and nobody is held criminally accountable, what does that tell you about who this technology was built to protect? Hit subscribe, because we cover the stories that are shaping your rights right now, whether you know it or not. Stay with me. This story goes deeper than one man, one arrest, and one algorithm. To understand what happened to Robert Williams, you need to understand who he was and just how ordinary the life was that the Detroit Police Department interrupted on that January night. Robert was a family man who had built a quiet, stable life in the Detroit suburbs. He worked in corporate America. He commuted. He came home. He helped with homework. He was the kind of father who live-streamed his drive home from work on Facebook, not for any particular reason, just because it was something he did. That live stream, as it would turn out, was the alibi that proved his innocence. Because on October 3, 2018, while someone was stealing watches from the Shinola store in downtown Detroit, Robert Williams was on a 24-mile commute from Rochester Hills to Farmington Hills. His route documented in real time on social media, placing him nowhere near the crime scene. He did not know on that October day that anything of consequence had happened. He did not know that a detective from the Detroit Police Department would one day feed a blurry, still image from that store's security footage into a facial recognition system operated by the Michigan State Police. He did not know that the algorithm would scan its database of driver's license photos and return his name as a possible match. He did not know that the detective would then build a photo lineup from that flawed result, show it to a Shinola loss prevention contractor who had not even been present in the store during the theft, and use that contractor's tentative identification to obtain an arrest warrant. He did not know any of this. He was just driving home from work. He found out on January 9, 2020, when he pulled into his driveway and a police car pulled in right behind him and blocked him in. It had started earlier that day with a phone call. A Detroit police detective called Robert at work and told him he needed to turn himself in. Robert asked what for. The detective wouldn't say. Robert assumed it was a mistake, maybe even a prank. He finished his shift and drove home. But when he called Melissa on the way, she told him the police were already at the house. He turned onto his street and saw the patrol car in front of his driveway. He pulled in. The patrol car pulled in behind him. He was blocked before he had taken a single step toward his front door. Melissa came outside. Their daughters were watching from the window. Robert asked the officers why he was being arrested. They told him it was for a retail theft in Detroit. He told them he had never stolen anything. He told them they had the wrong person. They put him in handcuffs anyway. It was a cold, rainy night. Melissa watched her husband being led away in handcuffs in front of their home, in front of their daughters, on a charge that had been manufactured by an algorithm operating on a blurry photograph taken 14 months earlier. She drove to an unfamiliar part of Detroit to try to bring him home. She could not. He was being processed. He was going into the system. His youngest daughter waited up for him. When he did not come home, she cried and told her mother that Daddy had lied about coming right back. Robert Williams spent that night in a Detroit Police Department holding cell. Overcrowded, dirty, a cement floor. 30 hours in total, from the moment the handcuffs went on to the moment he was finally released. The following day, he was brought into an interrogation room. A detective placed a sheet of paper on the table in front of him. On it was a still image captured from the Shinola store security footage. A blurry, low-quality photograph of a heavy-set man in a baseball cap. Robert Williams picked up the photograph. He held it next to his own face. He looked at the detective. "Robert, that's not me. That is not me at all. Y'all can't tell that." The detective's response was 4 words that have since been quoted in congressional testimony, academic research papers, legal briefs, and news articles around the world. "The computer says it's you. The computer says it's you. Not the evidence. Not a witness who was present at the crime. Not a fingerprint, not a DNA sample, not a single piece of physical evidence connecting Robert Williams to a watch store he had never entered. A computer, running an algorithm, on a blurry photograph, that had matched Robert's face from an expired driver's license photo in a state database. That had then been shown to a contractor who was not present during the crime and who made a tentative identification that the detective used to justify an arrest warrant, filed without disclosing the full extent of the technology's unreliability to the magistrate who signed it. Robert pointed out his alibi, the Facebook live stream from the date of the crime, placing him on a commute 24 miles from the scene. The detective noted it. The interview continued. 8 hours after the detective had acknowledged that the case against Robert Williams was deeply flawed, Robert Williams was still in that building. Still in custody. Still waiting. It took nearly 2 weeks after his release for the charges to be formally dropped. Robert held a photograph next to his own face and asked if they could not see the difference. The detective said the computer said it was him. At what point in this story did the Detroit Police Department lose the right to claim they were doing their jobs? Drop your answer in the comments. To understand why this happened, you need to understand what facial recognition technology actually is and what it is not. Facial recognition technology works by converting an image of a face into a numerical data map, measuring distances between eyes, the width of a nose, the shape of a jawline, and comparing that map against a database of stored images to find potential matches. In theory, it sounds reliable. In practice, the accuracy varies dramatically depending on the quality of the image and the demographics of the person being identified. Here is the critical fact. Facial recognition technology is significantly less accurate when identifying black faces than white faces. This is not a controversial claim. It has been documented by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, by MIT researchers, and by independent audits of every major commercial facial recognition system currently in use. The systems were trained primarily on datasets that skewed heavily toward white, male faces. As a result, the algorithms perform with measurably less precision when the face belongs to a person of color, to a woman, or to an older individual. The detective who arrested Robert Williams was using a technology known to have higher error rates for black faces on a blurry low-quality image, presenting the result to a witness who was not present during the crime, and omitting key information about the technology's limitations from the warrant application. Every single step in that chain was a choice, and every single choice led to a black man in handcuffs in his own driveway. Robert Williams was not alone. By the time his case became public in August 2020, 2 other black Detroit residents had also been wrongfully arrested by the Detroit Police Department based on false facial recognition matches. Portia Woodruff, a 32-year-old black woman who was 8 months pregnant at the time of her arrest, was detained for 11 hours on charges of robbery and carjacking based on a facial recognition match. She had a documented alibi. She was released, and the charges were eventually dropped. Michael Oliver, another black Detroit resident, was also wrongfully arrested based on a facial recognition result, following the same pattern: a flawed algorithmic match, an insufficient independent investigation, an innocent man detained. 3 known wrongful arrests. 3 innocent people detained, processed, and charged. 3 families traumatized. Every single one of them was black. Robert Williams filed a lawsuit against the Detroit Police Department in 2020. The ACLU of Michigan and the University of Michigan Law School's Civil Rights Litigation Initiative took his case, alleging violation of his Fourth Amendment rights and Michigan's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. At first, Robert said, all he wanted was an apology and a policy change. He wanted the department to acknowledge what had happened and commit to doing it differently. He tried to pursue that without a lawsuit. It went nowhere, so he filed. For more than 3 years, the case moved through the federal court system, building a record of exactly what the Detroit Police Department had done, how it had done it, and what safeguards had been absent at every step. During discovery, the legal team confirmed what they had suspected. The detectives' warrant application had omitted critical information about the unreliability of the facial recognition result, information that, had the magistrate been given it, would have put the legitimacy of the entire arrest in question before a single handcuff was applied. The ACLU described the case as the clearest documented example of how facial recognition technology, applied without adequate safeguards, transforms a flawed algorithm into a civil rights violation. On June 28, 2024, the parties formalized a settlement agreement that civil rights advocates immediately described as groundbreaking, not primarily because of the financial compensation, but because of what it required the Detroit Police Department to change. Robert Williams received a $300,000 settlement, but the money was, in many ways, the least significant part of what was achieved. Under the settlement, enforceable by the federal court for 4 years, the Detroit Police Department was prohibited from arresting anyone based solely on a facial recognition result. It was prohibited from conducting photo lineups built directly on facial recognition leads without independent, corroborating evidence. It was required to train all relevant officers on the risks and limitations of the technology, with specific attention to its higher misidentification rates for people of color. And critically, an audit was mandated of every single case since 2017 in which facial recognition technology had been used to generate an arrest warrant. Every one, going back 7 years. When a reporter asked how many cases that might involve, a Detroit police commissioner gave an answer that should have been front-page news across the country. We're talking about dozens. Dozens of cases. Dozens of people who may have been arrested, charged, detained, or prosecuted based on the same flawed technology and the same insufficient safeguards that put Robert Williams in handcuffs in his driveway on a cold January night. Robert Williams said he was mostly satisfied with the settlement, but not entirely. What he had wanted most of all, from the very beginning, was for the Detroit Police Department to stop using facial recognition technology altogether. That demand got no traction. The technology remains in use. What changed was the framework around it. And Robert Williams is the reason that framework now exists. The audit could involve dozens of people wrongfully arrested by the same technology. Do you think $300,000 was enough for what was done to Robert and his family? And should police be allowed to use facial recognition at all? Drop your answer below. Robert Williams's case did not stay in Detroit. It became a national story about the intersection of technology, race, and law enforcement, and about what happens when institutions adopt powerful tools without adequately asking who those tools will harm. Researchers at MIT had already published findings showing that commercial facial recognition systems misidentified darker-skinned women at a rate of up to 34%, compared to less than 1% for lighter-skinned men. The National Institute of Standards and Technology had found that facial recognition algorithms produced false positives for Black and Asian faces at rates 10 to 100 times higher than for white faces, depending on the algorithm. This was not hidden information. It was published. It was available. The Detroit Police Department had access to it. And it used the technology anyway on a low-quality image, on a population the technology was documented to misidentify at elevated rates, without the safeguards that would have caught the error before it reached Robert Williams's driveway. Following Robert's case, state legislatures across the country began introducing legislation to regulate or restrict police use of facial recognition. Several cities banned it outright. The conversation Robert Williams had forced into the open by refusing to accept his wrongful arrest quietly was now happening in state houses, in Congress, and in police departments that had not yet had their own Robert Williams moment, but were beginning to understand that they could. One man's refusal to accept that the computer was right when his own face told a different story had become a turning point in the debate over who gets to be misidentified by technology and who gets to pay the price. Before we close, here is what Robert Williams' story means for your rights right now. The Fourth Amendment protects you against unreasonable searches and seizures. An arrest based solely on a facial recognition result, without independent corroborating evidence, is, as the Williams case established, constitutionally suspect. The technology's documented inaccuracy, particularly for Black individuals, means that relying on it alone as the basis for an arrest warrant fails to meet the probable cause standard the Fourth Amendment requires. If you are ever arrested and you believe the identification evidence used against you is flawed, whether facial recognition, a photo lineup, or any other form of identification, you have the right to challenge that evidence in court. You have the right to demand discovery of how the identification was made, what technology was used, and what its documented error rates are. You have the right to say, "That is not me." And you have the right to a legal system that is required to listen. Let me tell you what Robert Williams' story is really about. It is not just about a flawed algorithm. It is about something older and more persistent than any technology, the assumption, embedded in the systems we build and the choices we make with them, that black faces are interchangeable. That black innocence requires more proof than a photograph held next to a living face. That the word of a computer is more credible than the word of a black man sitting across a table saying, plainly and clearly, "That is not me." Robert Williams spent 30 hours in a cell for a crime he did not commit, based on a technology he did not know existed, deployed by a department that did not adequately question what it was doing. He came home to a daughter who had cried waiting for him and asked why he had lied about coming right back. He had not lied. He had been taken. And the distinction between those two things, between a man who abandoned his family and a man whose family was temporarily separated from him by the state, is the distinction that the law is supposed to protect. The settlement did not give Robert Williams back those 30 hours. It did not undo what his daughter saw in that driveway. What it did was create a framework that makes it harder for the next Robert Williams to be taken in the first place. And it created a public, documented, federally enforced record that says, "We know this technology fails black people at higher rates, and we are now required to account for that before we use it to take someone's freedom." Robert Williams held a photograph next to his face and asked a simple question. It took 4 years, a federal lawsuit, and a landmark settlement to get an answer that matched what everyone in that interrogation room could already see. If this story alarmed you, and it should, hit that like button and share this video. Because facial recognition technology is being used by police departments in cities across this country right now. And most people have no idea that it fails black faces at documented, published, consistently ignored rates. Drop a comment. Did you know this case happened? Do you think it should be banned entirely or just regulated more tightly? I read every single response. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We bring you the stories that reshape how you understand your rights every single week. We'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp out there, and remember, when the system gets it wrong, you have the right to say so. Loudly, clearly, and on the record.